What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. I'm your host, Stu Day. And look, we're spoiling you at the minute. We said that we were trying to aim for 24 guests this year. Well, we're going to be on to guest number 3 already. So, yeah, we're well on our way to trying to achieve that number. Just want to say a massive thank you to everybody. You know, our subscribers are going up, our followers are going up. Just want to say massive thank you to everybody that has subscribed, is watching, is listening. It does mean a hell of a lot to us. So what are we going to be talking about today on this episode? Well, over more recent months, I've been digging into the world of systems thinking and doing a lot of reading and a lot of research into that and looking at how that connects to the world of quality. And our guest today has some really great insights and opinions on this herself. So I thought, why not bring her on and we can chat about it together? We can solve this whole systems thinking world and figure stuff out. Yeah, so I'm going to introduce our guest now, and you will know her. I'm sure you'll know her. She is part of the Ministry of Testing community. She's been up on the Test Bash stage last year at Test Bash, giving her talk. She's putting posts out on LinkedIn that people are going mad for, which is what drove us to this conversation today. Have you guessed who it is yet? It's Philippa Jennings. Hey, Philippa, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I can't wait to get into this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here to talk about this, because we've talked a little bit about this because we talk on and off quite regularly, right? And I'm really keen to get into this conversation with you today. But before we do that, I mean, I gave you a little bit of an intro. Hopefully it was okay. But I'd love for you to just introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Stu said, my name's Philippa Jennings. I've now been working in sort of testing and quality for over 17 years. And much like I think a lot of people out there, I fell into testing purely by chance when I was doing one of these technical support type roles. And one of the things they asked me to do was to test the software that they were also developing. And then I kind of discovered that I was rather good at it. Or at least that's my perspective. And so I went on and I took it to other companies, and I really sort of learnt from different industries across the many years. And it was probably about 5-6 years ago I first came across sort of this shift left concept. And for me, that was my door into learning much more about what quality really means today, as opposed to the traditional sense of what quality meant. And it's really taken me on a journey, and it's brought me, well, it took me to Test Bash stage last year, as you said, talking about continuous quality and automation. And it's brought me here today to hopefully talk through some of my thinking a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, your talk was superb at Test Bash. MotoCon, as it's now called. But it was still
MotoCon.
It was Test Bash at the time, right? So it's still Test Bash to me for that very reason. But yeah, your talk was brilliant. I think it pulled together so many different aspects of the continuous quality conversation. And for anybody that hasn't seen it or hasn't listened to it, if you're a member of MOT, then you can go online and watch the talk. But you've been giving that same talk at other events as well, haven't you, Philippa? So it's quite possible that you might pop up somewhere
You never
for other
know.
people.
You never know, absolutely. So
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. So let's not mess about. Let's just get into this conversation, right? So you touched on there in your intro about talking around, the sort of the more traditional thinking around quality and how that's evolved over the last sort of 5-6 years. What was it that kind of triggered that shift in thinking initially?
Strangely enough, it was actually a director that I worked for many years ago. And they basically said, I want to introduce shift left, and that means that the testers and the automation testers we've got at the moment will no longer be doing that level of testing. We'll now pass it on to the developers to do.
Mhm.
I'm not going to comment on whether that was a good thing or not a good thing, but I will say that it triggered all sorts of, when you get that sort of like prickly sort of edgy
I
type
do.
feeling, and
Yes.
it really triggered me quite badly. And so I was like, well, what does this mean? What am I thinking about? Why is it such a problem in my head?
Yeah.
And so I went off digging, and that's when I really started coming across a lot of the great thought leaders we've got out there. Yourself, Dan Ashby. I think you were probably the first two, Vernon Richards as well. And I was doing a lot of reading, and it just really grew and grew from there. And it was suddenly, if we're handing it over to the developers to do all the automated testing, and all the people who are called manual testers are just going to be focusing in on doing exploratory testing in production, then what's the risk? And the risk for me was I knew the quality, for want of a better word, or the ambiguity, non-quality, of some of the requirements that we get through, and how easily they were misunderstood. So not only was there a question of, will the developers know what to test? But there was also a question of, how much testing would they do that would be the right amount? So for me, it was, as I say, I went digging and exploring and learning different things from different people and started pulling things together. And I became a thorn in my director's side, I think. He said that I was tenacious, and I certainly was, because I wanted to make sure that we were not putting our product at risk, because it really worried me. So, yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with being tenacious in our roles. I think the amount of battles that we've all had over the years for many different reasons, when within the quality roles, I'm going to say, because there's so many different categories of them now, aren't there? So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's you have to be pretty tenacious to be able to get your point across and not let things lie, and you know the point you made there, right, about not impacting the quality of the product that's going out the door. Now the thing is with that, often over the years, if the product has a problem, the first thing that gets picked on or blamed is testing, right? It's always been the case. So why wasn't this tested? Why wasn't this found in testing, etc., etc. So when this concept, or the thought process around shift left started growing, and obviously you were doing your research into it, and obviously a lot of other people were as well. One thing that kept jumping out at me was everybody kept referring to it as shift left testing. So all we're going to shift left is the testing part. And like, to your point, that means the developers can do that, right? And I was actually very much in the same sort of headspace as you, in like, well, what does that actually mean? What does that mean for other people's roles? How can you do all this testing? So for me, that's where I started thinking about sort of quality more holistically, because like I say, most often whenever there's an issue with a product, testing is to blame.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying the testers are to blame. I'm saying testing is to blame. That's generally what the messaging comes out at. But actually, as things have sort of grown in my head, it's so much bigger than just testing. And this is where this sort of conversation comes in, or sort of around that testing versus the system that creates the product. And actually, we're all part of a system. But again, what does that really mean? And then thinking about quality more holistically. And I know sort of over more recent times, you've been delving into that more. And a lot of the posts you've been putting out on LinkedIn are sort of like breaking that kind of thinking down. And you started talking about systemic quality. Are you able to talk a little bit more about what you mean by systemic quality? Because I love that term, by the way. I think it's a
Yeah,
great term.
it is absolutely. And another sort of way I've sort of started labeling it is by calling it quality as a system. So either way, you're looking at that system aspect when you're thinking about quality. And for me, I've started to sort of break that down into a bit of a sort of 7-parted, sort of interconnected system. And so I think really for good quality as a system to be happening, you need to have these interconnected and all optimized to be happening at the same level all at once in many different ways, but you can build towards that. So the 7 parts that I would say are, first and foremost, your people.
Yeah.
So I think something we often rely on anyway are the skills and the experience of people within the teams, but we also need to be looking at the collaboration patterns, so how the collaboration is happening between people, and also how they're communicating. 2 very important distinct
Or
elements.
not communicating.
Or not communicating or collaborating, because you can have good communication, you can have really good communication, but that doesn't mean that you've got good collaboration.
No, it
And
doesn't,
vice
no.
versa. So they're 2 very distinct things that need to be considered when you're thinking about the people aspect. The next one on my list would be the understanding of the problem. So this is something you hear and see a lot. So I think there's a cartoon that most of us will probably be aware of, where you've got the swing that's been asked to be built, and different people have taken the problem or the requirements information and seen it differently. So you've got the swing that actually is what you and I would mostly think about, a swing that runs through the middle of a trunk, and swings that don't actually swing, and all sorts of different things. So understanding the actual problem really helps us to get clarity about what it is we're trying to achieve. So if we know what we're building, we can build the right thing, as opposed to just building what we're told, but building it right. So if it's broken when we've actually built it, then it's probably because there was shaky ground earlier on within the overall system. So no amount of testing is going to actually sort of help to avoid that if we didn't know what it was that needed to be, what problem needed to be solved. It's actually a discussion I have many a time with my partner, who's a product manager, and that's something that we talk about a lot, and we have the same thinking, make sure we know what problem we're trying to solve. Then we've got processes, and that's your workflows. So your handoffs between different teams or different people, where you can lose that context, your bottlenecks that can happen, and therefore the pressure that comes from that, and sort of different ways of working which can enable or actually make quality impossible. So there's 2 ways of looking at getting those ways of working right or wrong. So then technology and your tools. You've got your architecture, your automation, and your infrastructure. But if the systems make it the quality of that difficult, it doesn't matter if you've not got the systems in place correctly. You're going to just have lots of effort with very little quality coming out at the end of it. So if you're having to switch and swap between different frameworks and different coding languages and different approaches, it's going to get a little bit muddy and difficult. Then you've got your feedback loops. Really important. I talk about feedback loops a lot, just generally when I'm talking about quality, because the more feedback loops you've got in there, the quicker you can get the information that you need about what's going on. So feedback loops really helps us to know quickly and clearly whether what we're building is working as we expect it to. So we can learn from that. And those feedback loops also go out into production, by the way. It's not just solely in the development side. But those feedback loops really help us to learn and to correct whatever we're doing. The 6th one is about the culture and the values. And I think the culture and values within a company or within a department or even within a team are probably one of the hardest things to get, because it's all about sort of how people are acting when no one's looking. So what behaviours are getting rewarded? I think you've done either a talk, certainly an article about this before, and that bonus-driven sort of approach on things. So if you're basically rewarding the wrong behaviours in your team, that you're going to get what you're going to get out of it. And when I say wrong, I mean that people are doing things really quickly, that people are doing it by a deadline. You know, you're not actually incentivizing people to make sure that they're thinking about the quality.
Yeah.
And then the final one is actually on the leadership and the decisions. So it's about making sure that what gets prioritized and what gets measured really helps to create the right conditions where quality can thrive. Because if you've got the wrong types of metrics, which I'm sure we'll get on to talking about at some point, you're basically delving into that world of pain, and your quality system will start falling apart. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm thinking at the moment. It's quite a lot of information, but it's those 7 that go: people, understanding, processes, tools, feedback, culture, and finally leadership.
I think it's a great way to break it down, because when you start looking at a system as a whole, there's so many moving parts, and through all the sort of the learning that I'm doing around systems thinking, I mean, it's blowing my mind. I'm not going to lie. I'm reading a book at the moment. It's a really hard read, but actually it's a really good read at the same time. I'll share the link to it. But the book was actually written in, I think it was 2009, but it's still one of the best system thinking books. It's called Thinking in Systems, a Primer, and it's by Donella Meadows. It's a tough read, but it's a really good read. And I was put onto it by James Lawther, who joined the podcast recently, the author of Managed by Morons. He references it in his book. And it's all about flows and stock and levers, and it just keeps bringing me back to when you were going through your list of sort of the different enablers, let's say, these things that you want to focus on. They're all levers that you can play with to improve the quality of ultimately what comes out at the end.
Absolutely. And that's the fundamental part of it all, is that when you've got a system, and you've got a system that is actually baking quality in, or even if it's not baking quality in, what you need to be looking at, rather than, as you were talking about earlier, testing getting blamed, you want to be looking at actually which part of that system could have helped us to discover this earlier. What is it that we're missing? Where is that fire burning potentially? But because it's going to be the system or systems thinking, the way that what we're leveraging within it that's causing us problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of, if I'm honest, a lot of team and also a lot of leadership struggle, because they're focusing, and it may not even be a fault of their own, right? Because of the nature of the role, the what the business ask is, the pressure on delivery, all these different things that play into it, the system, that they only focus on their bit, right? So you'll have your quality leader or whatever, only focusing in on their bit, right? The testing or whatever that looks like. You'll have your engineering lead only focusing in on their, and it's trying to bring those people together, like you said earlier, to start with people, to collaborate better, communicate better, look at where those breakdowns are happening. But it's not just within the team, it's outside of the team as well. So if you've got, you might have people in your team. So you've got your engineers, you've got your quality professionals, you've got your product owners, you might have your business analysts, delivery leads. They might all be part of your team. But it's much bigger than just that. You might have a system within your team, but then you've got the overarching system that allows all teams are working within, which then becomes a much harder piece to try and influence and solve. So I think, I think that's where a lot of people a lot of that thinking breaks down for people, because it's just a too big a, almost like, ask to think about that whole picture. When we start talking about continuous quality and holistic quality, that's what we mean, right? It's that holistic,
Yeah,
from one end to the other end of the system.
absolutely. And I think in order to be able to really drive down that road, you need to have quality as a system being led from the front. So if you've got your senior management, your senior leadership at the top that are really believing in how following this systemic type approach can help to build out everything that they need. So we've got quality as being something that we're obviously really passionate in, but as a business, quite often they're actually more interested in getting features out there into production as quickly as possible, or making sure that they're driving the cost down as much as possible. And then there's the efficiency of how things come about. And actually, you need to look at that whole picture in order to be able to make sure that we're having quality being driven through all of it, and then down into the teams and into the way that we start thinking and approaching the actual feature or new functionality or whatever it is before we start actually thinking about that, let alone building it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just want to, obviously, you put in your list of 7 pieces, sort of areas for people to think about. You put people first, right? And I always say everything starts and ends with people. Interestingly, when I was chatting to James on the podcast a few weeks back, we got into that, and something that resonated with me from what he said was everything does start with people, but then you've got the system that they have to work within. So the system needs to be able to support them and enable them to be successful. So, it's kind of like, okay, we can start with people, we can get them communicating better, we can get them collaborating better. But if fundamentally the overall system is not designed to work that way or encouraged to work that way, then it's just, we're going to be on a hiding to nothing, aren't we?
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? You have to start with people in my sort of view, because you need to be, whatever people you've got is probably going to dictate kind of some of your ways of working, your processes that you're going to think about, and also your technologies and your tools. And so all of these things are not the process, the ways we work isn't necessarily going to guarantee us quality, because people might not actually engage with it or really understand it or or they come across a situation where they can't follow it. Again, technology and tools. It might be you get a really good tool, but actually you're expecting people to be using it. So you're always coming back to those people every single time, and we have to be thinking about the skills that they've got, the experience they've got, how they're going to work with each other in order to make all these other aspects work as we want them to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you went from people to problem, understanding the problem, right? And if we don't understand the problem, we can create more problems for ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So to that point, if we just go and look at, sort of zoom in into one specific area, thinking that's where our problem is, without thinking bigger picture, we can try and solve that problem. Oh, we'll get a tool to do that. Right. So we get a tool to do that. And guess what? That isn't where the problem lies. The problem lies before that or after that, really. Right. So we've gone out, we've gone and got this tool. You've then got to upskill people in this tool, because, if you don't upskill people in this tool, then you're not going to solve your problem.
Yep.
So you're invested in training people in a tool that you don't actually need in the first place, because that's not where the problem lies. And it just creates more problems, right? So I think, to your point, it's like understanding, when we look at quality from a system perspective, there's going to be numerous problems that we're going to identify. am I right in thinking when you mentioned that when you talk about problems in your 7 enablers there, are you focusing on the customer problem to start with, as in what is it we need to build and why? Is that where that sits, or are you thinking more across the whole system and understanding the different problems potentially that might be going on?
You can think about it in both ways. So there is that whole sort of like, are we actually building the right thing in the first place? So is it going to meet the customer's needs? Is it going to meet probably the customer combined with the business's needs, etc.? So you've got that, and I think that is quite a sort of like it's a narrow type sort of area that we're looking at there, but it is a vitally important one, because if not everybody understands what you need to build, then off you go on a complete tangent and you make assumptions, and then testing comes along and sort of proves that that's something wrong there, and then you go back to changing it again, then you do it a bit faster because your deadline's looming, etc. So all sorts of things can happen. The worst one being it goes out into production and actually nobody uses it because it didn't solve anybody's problem. And we've all been there. I'm pretty sure we've all been there. Something's been
and
deployed.
You never get any feedback to say that either, do you? It's like, how you know that thing we worked tirelessly on? How's it going? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. But I think more to the point though, anything that crops up, you've got a stock question you can ask practically all the time. So it might be, do we need a new test management tool? So your question is, what problem are we trying to solve if we do?
Yes.
And you can move on, to the automation frameworks. Okay, but what problem are we actually trying to solve? What do we need out of that technology, out of that tool? What do we need out of that process, out of that way of working? What do we need out of the feedback loops? So you're always asking, what problem are we trying to actually solve, so that we have that clarity from the get-go, rather than honing in and saying, well, that didn't work, which is bound to happen, but it's probably because you haven't dug deep enough into sort of what the actual problem was in the first place, and you've gone with a symptom rather than the actual root cause.
Yes, and I mean it's one of my go-to questions all the time. What problem are we trying to solve? What outcome are we trying to achieve? And I use those interchangeably. They're not the same, but I use them interchangeably because we can talk about what problem we're trying to solve. Okay, so we've got this problem that we've identified. Okay, great. So if we solve that problem, what outcome does it allow us to achieve?
Yeah.
And it just kind of like takes the question to the sort of next level of thinking. And because to your point, often, I say often, it might be often, it might not be often, but in experience, often. The problem you think you have is not the problem that you actually have. So you're and I always sort of refer to like, the human body, and you've got a pain somewhere. The chances are that pain is not being generated, like that's the symptom of another issue, right? So I've got a pain in my leg. Yeah, that'll be my back. Okay, great. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So it's kind of like, to your point, how do you making sure that you are focusing on the right level of investigation, analysis, assessment to determine, is that really the problem, or is that a symptom of the problem? So if you've got lots of tests failing in your pipeline, is the problem that the tests are flaky, or is it the underlying architecture of how the environment is being built, or is it the fact that actually they're not flaky, they are actually failing correctly, but you're just looking at them and say, this is just noise, and actually it's not adding any value. And actually, because the information that you're getting from those failing tests doesn't give you any insight as to why they're really failing.
Absolutely.
There's numerous different ways you can look at that, but you can almost come up with or make your own story up as to what is the problem with that. So it's really important you go down into that sort of detail to figure that out. And the next thing on your list is process and workflow, and obviously that's how everything pieces together. So we touched on there that something might not be great here, but is that the starting point of that, or is that just something that builds up through the process?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you think about your sort of software development life cycle, if you literally sort of go with the whole thing, whether you're figure of eighting or whether you're doing it in a sort of a line, whichever way you want to look at it, you've got your basic terminology that we talked about at the beginning, where people go shift left, so you want to shift everything up here. And yes, absolutely, you want to be finding things as early as possible in your different stages.
Yeah.
And people put testing up there, and you could call it testing. It's also, asking the right questions at the right time and thinking about what is it that we need to that will mean that we deliver quality. What does quality even mean to us? So there's all the things that are happening at different sort of stages of the life cycle. And so if you have vague requirements at the beginning, then when you get into development, you're going to have lots of assumptions being made. Then you've got your testing, whether it's being done by the developer or whether it's being done in automated fashion, but it's going to be testing what the assumptions are probably saying. Or it might be another person's perspective comes along and they go, I actually thought that it meant something completely different. So then you've got backwards and forwards going on between the developer and the other person, and so on and so forth. So you've got that right the way through to delivering the wrong thing ultimately, and you've had lots of bugs in between, and your timeline has gone completely, it's probably doubled or if not tripled in length. And it might be even that you don't discover that it's all so very wrong until your customers are using it, and then that gives your impact to the company and to the and then that comes down into your department and into your team and the product. People might actually stop using your product, and they certainly won't be actually telling people it's a really good product to go with. So if you haven't got those processes right, and I'm not saying that everything stems from product and the requirements, because you could have things that go wrong at another stage. You could have a handover, which is why in my view, if you can avoid having handoffs between developers and testers, and you're more working as a collaborative pair, then you're not going to lose that potential block of information that's needed to keep driving the quality through. And that can happen between teams as well as within teams. So there's lots of different process stages where things can go wrong when you're going from the requirements out to production and then obviously beyond. But beyond is more about your feedback loops that are coming back at that stage, as opposed to the system that you've got in place to be actually delivering something of quality in the first place.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this as well, Philippa, but one thing I've seen specifically within teams, they don't necessarily know what the entire process flow looks like of a particular system, right? So from an idea through to production, and this is a question I ask when if I go into a new organization, I'm like, do you know what your process flow is of the system that you're working within to get an idea from idea into the customer's hands? Do you know what that looks like? And often they'll go, no, I know this bit because that's the bit I work in, but I don't know what comes before, and I don't necessarily know what comes after. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes too much information can just become very sort of diluted and not add much value. I feel like teams should understand what has to happen or what is happening, so they know where and how they should or need to be involved. So when we're talking about like shifting left and we talk about shifting testing left, well, let's just park testing for a moment. Let's talk about shifting people left to collaborate better and communicate more effectively, and understanding where in your process that can happen. Yeah. So one of the things that I did in my time at Capital One was we used a technique called value stream mapping. So we we thought about holistic systems thinking. How do we build quality in throughout this system through the processes that we have? So we mapped it out. We mapped out at a very high level to start with, does the end-to-end process look like to get from idea to production, and looked at all the different layers, or so all the different opportunities where we had something in place. And I would just do something because it might be a big thing or a small thing, or where quality would be impacted in some way. Now that could be that it helped improve quality, or actually may impact quality in a negative way. And we went through that process, and we just sort of highlighted all the different areas. Now that might be, so here we're doing a three amigos, right? You can call it what you like, but here, this is where we do a three amigos. Great. Okay, cool. Is that the only time you come together to talk? Do you talk at any other point throughout the process? And you can start asking these different questions. We did a lot of work, and I would really encourage people to look more into example mapping and working closely with product to do example mapping, and doing that earlier, and bringing your sort of engineers and quality professionals into those conversations sort of earlier on at the early stages of an idea. But it's a really great way to kind of give people a much better insight as to the whole system, so they know the scale of what they're working within, but also they know how and where potentially things could go wrong or are going wrong, or where we just don't have anything at all that actually could help improve quality or build quality in. So there's gaps. You can find gaps. You can remove noise. Oh, we've got this quality gate here. Well, why do we need that? What problem does that solve, right? And you can ask all these different things. And I think that's something that I would love to see more teams doing or being involved in, and sort of leaders in our space thinking about and shaping that view to help their teams understand what does end to end really mean in our process flow.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that was probably one of the early doors things that I did when I started sort of digging into things a bit more within the company where I was at the time, was to really start understanding more about why things were problematic when we got to the development side of things. And so that sort of sent me backwards a little bit more. And I think, a lot of companies just, they tend to keep it hidden, or it's not in your remit because you're in the engineering section sort of thing, and this is in product or wherever. And I think the more we understand about how product work, for example, is really empowering, because then we can ask more of the right questions, I think. And we're not necessarily challenging them. We're not saying you're not doing things right. We're more trying to draw more information out, so we've got a shared understanding, the same understanding as they've got, that they might not be knowing how to communicate as well as, or they're stuck in a old traditional way of doing things that maybe hasn't been communicating it very clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so something I would, and I think I wouldn't put this on team members to try and go out there necessarily and understand your entire process, right? I'm looking in and talking about the leaders of those teams and how they connect better, and then help their teams understand what that looks like, and gather that information and share it, it by whatever means, so they are better equipped ultimately to ask those questions, to challenge where things may not feel quite right. I can only imagine what your dinner times are like at the table with you as a quality professional and your partner as a product person. Oh man, that's just like crazy.
It's the beauty of it is that we're actually quite often on the same page.
Right,
the time when it gets challenging is if I start sort of like trying to suggest that there might be any challenges towards the product process, then I get a bit of a face in return, shall we say? But yeah, it's but it's all about understanding, and we need to sort of understand context and that sort of thing better than most of the times traditionally, certainly, if not probably still. The types of information that would come into a team would be a little on the lacking side, shall we say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to step forward. I mean, we've touched on tech and tools, and we've talked about sort of that generally seems to be the place where people delve in, right? They jump straight into that, you know, they focus in that area because, I mean, let's not lie. I mean, there's so many tools and technologies out there that supposedly make our lives easier just like that, right? I mean, and it's really easy to get drawn into that and think, we needed a tool for this. We need a tool for that. We need a, you know, and with AI now, you know, in play, I think that just multiplies it by 100. Excuse me. So I think, you know, we've touched on the tech and tool side, so I'm not going to go into it in too much more detail, but I think everything sort of ultimately that is sort of the last thing you need to be thinking about in my mind.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely.
So I've been in conversations where tools have dictated to us how we work. Right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So sorry, we can't do that because Jira doesn't allow it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you what? Hold on a minute. You're telling me that Jira is dictating how I work? Come on now, don't be silly. But it happens, right?
Yeah.
It's something that, you know, and coming back to what we were saying about problems, that's where you start creating problems for yourself. You start wrapping yourselves up into these tools and they don't allow you to actually change. You see a problem, you go, we need to change how we work. Well, we can't do that because this tooling doesn't allow us to do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my days. Right, okay, well, change the tool then, right? To allow the tool to solve your problem. Don't sit back and go, well, we can't do it.
Yeah,
It's a big bugbear of
it's
mine.
madness, isn't it? And I think it happens a lot more than people might even think. But yeah, it's absolutely.
Yeah, it's mental. It is mental. But I want to bring us onto feedback loops. Feedback loops. I love feedback loops. Continuous feedback loops. And you talk about ensuring that, you know, you're building feedback loops in to different, you know, throughout your system, throughout your processes. You know, you're creating opportunities to gather feedback, however, whatever that looks like, you know, of a qualitative nature, to understand, are we building the right thing? Are we on track? Are we this? Are we that? Right? And those feedback loops for me can come in many different forms. But in your experience, Philippa, what does good feedback loops look like from what you know, for teams that you've worked in, but also sort of the thinking you're putting in place at the moment?
Yeah, so I've worked in teams where testing has been probably the main feedback loop. Just testing, you know, whether it's the automated tests or whether it's the user interface type, usability type testing. And invariably, my experience has been that feedback that you get is always late. It's always at, you know, after it's ready to go out for development or out for into production, or even, you know, the customer feedback that we get when they phone up and they're talking to our service desk and they're going, it's not working. So, but I generally sort of like look at feedback in different ways. So what I'm starting to learn a little bit more about, and I've heard the terms many a time, but it's something that is just starting to grow for me, is are to do with metrics. So your lagging indicators and your leading indicators.
Yeah.
So I think the majority of companies, certainly the ones that are maybe still stuck in a little bit of the traditional sort of mindset, focus very much on those lagging indicators, which is what I was talking about there. So getting the feedback from the testing or from production or customer complaints or the system crashing or whatever. So there you've got sort of where quality sort of hasn't happened or hasn't been built in, and you're finding that out late. Whereas what we need to be thinking about a lot more, obviously, are these leading indicators, which you probably know far, far more about than I do. But I do know that if we've got leading indicators, they're going to tell us that the quality that we are building in. So we're getting those early defects found. So I used to think about them in terms of in your CI/CD, getting, if you literally draw out your pipeline, whatever it might look like for your CI/CD, you've got at every sort of moment, you've got some sort of gate in there where you've got a feedback loop that comes back. So it might be that your unit tests run, or that certain other tests run, or you've got some static analysis that goes on, whatever it is, but you've got various different things that are happening. So get those feedback loops into your pipelines, absolutely, but also have them there for when a bug does come up, or a defect if it's later on. When could that have been possibly seen earlier? And then once you've identified where that is, which, as we've spoken about, is not always the easiest thing, but it's like really getting to the root cause, just going, the symptom, it's a bug, therefore we missed it in testing, or therefore the developer missed it. It could be something totally different. So you've identified that, and then you can get a feedback loop in at that stage. So it might be a check, a static analysis check, an extra code review check, whatever it needs to be, a bit more exploratory testing happening at the same time as the development's going on. So you've got more pairing and collaboration going on. There's lots of different sort of things you can do there, and then you can use your leading indicators to help you to be able to identify your problems that you're getting, and hopefully the more they go to the left, the earlier that they happen, gives you that clear indication that you're building that quality in and you're thinking about these things. And I'm talking about not just testing, but monitoring your alert system, your accessibility of the product, anything you've got in around that. There's so many different aspects that you can build in to say that you're baking quality in from the beginning. That and it will differ from context to context, obviously. But the earlier we can find, the earlier we get these indicators telling us, then the better it's going to be, basically, for us.
Yeah, and I just wanted to expand on, obviously, the monitoring side. One of the things I don't see very much of, and I'd love for somebody to comment or share examples of, is where they've actually got similar, not the same, but similar levels of monitoring in the lower environments as they do in production, so that you're seeing some of these things happening, right?
Yeah.
I know there's cost involved in that, and maybe cost versus the value of doing so, all this stuff. But for me, that I always feel like we're missing a trick, that we've not got similar levels of monitoring into our lower environments that are obviously, all our new changes are going through, et cetera, that could enable us to pick up on some of these things earlier. But I think, ultimately it's literally about looking at any and every possibility or possible area where you could gather feedback. And that might be through monitoring. It might be through your pipelines. It might just be through a conversation you're having, right? It might be, I know this is more difficult with a lot more remote working, but you overhear something somebody says in the office and you go, hold on a minute, you what? You what?
Yeah,
I've had that a few times in the year. Yeah. Do you know what? I really miss that. I miss those days where you could just go, sorry, did you just say no? Surely not.
Yeah.
That does make it harder, I have to admit, not having those sort of more organic moments in time where people are going, something wrong here, what's going on? Or I've just done this, can somebody, like shouting over the desk, can somebody just have a quick look at this? Or it's like you do it on Slack, and then somebody has to read the Slack, and then it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
I think you can also, I think the way that you just described some of the feedback sort of things there, you can actually break them down into sort of different feedback criteria. So you've got your user feedback. Now that could be a UAT type tester, or it could be the actual customer. You've got your technical feedback, so what you're building into your pipeline and anywhere else. And if you can find a way of identifying which are the riskier areas of your product, and you can get that into the lower down environments. Yeah, totally agree with that. And then you've got your team retrospectives or whatever. So I think if you think about things in those sort of three categories, you can see where your different types of feedback that you can really be getting and how powerful it can be.
Yeah, I think the retrospectives is very much sentiment. how are people feeling, that kind of more emotional type feedback, which I think is really powerful, especially when we're talking more from is the system working perspective, because you can get some really good insight from people like, this is terrible, what's going on? Well, what makes you feel that way? And then you start having that conversation about, well, this happened and that happened, and we're just not very good at this, or we've got a lot of friction here, between, say about like between product and engineering, there's this friction. How do we solve this friction? So I think that sort of that sentiment, that emotional feedback is really, really powerful, outside of people just moaning.
Yes.
Because I get it, people can moan as much as they like, but at some point you've got to say, yeah, but what can we do about it? Come on, let's talk about what we could do about it. And that actually leads us on to the next part, which is where you've talked about culture and values. Right. And I think this is, for me, probably the hardest part, because it all revolves around behaviors.
Yeah.
Right. And going into organizations, one of the hardest things that I find is influencing behaviors in a consistent way. So what you might find is that you'll have an immediate team that you're able to, work with, mentor, coach, influence behaviors, etc., and everything feels like, yeah, great. But then trying to influence behaviors outside of that space becomes much, 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 much harder. And then as you go up layers, harder and harder and harder. Because actually what's happening is the behaviors are being dictated, well, not dictated, but influenced down.
Yes.
For whatever reason. And you touched on it earlier, that I've talked about behavior-driven development and how that kind of kicks in, and, people focus on, what do I need to do to achieve my bonus? What you're asking me to do, or what you're talking to me about doing, doesn't really align to that. So I'm not really going to pay much attention to that. What are your thoughts on how can we set our teams up for success in, when it comes to building more consistent and aligned behaviors and purpose when, in this area?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, and I don't think there's any one answer that would spread sort of widely enough. But I think then, I've mentioned incentives before, and you've just touched on it again. We need to, as team members, as individuals that are on the sort of the front line, so to speak, actually doing work, we need to, first of all, we need to have psychological safety. This is a topic that I come back to quite often. So we need to feel safe that we can speak up about things that maybe are going wrong, that maybe something that we've done wrong. That I think people pay lip service a lot to psychological safety by saying we're a blame-free culture. And absolutely, there may never be actually somebody who comes up to you individually and go, you're to blame. But does that mean that it's psychologically safe? And I'm not that convinced that it does. I think we need to be able to be incentivized and rewarded almost for bringing up these types of issues that we are thinking there might be. So say we sort of basically put our hands up and say, look, I did this bit wrong, hands up before it goes out to production. You need some sort of, not just, okay, this is how we're going to solve it, this is what we're going to do next, blah, 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 blah. You also need some encouragement to know that you've done the right thing, because you can get swept along with the whole, this is how we're going to fix it, this is the solution, this is what we need to do next, and all the extra layers of rubbish that comes along with that, which is sometimes really, it's really challenging to some individuals more than others. So if you've not got thick skin, it can really start sort of, oh no, I was wrong, I wish I hadn't said anything, etc. So I think it's important that wherever you are, the leadership and the higher up in the organisation are not just saying, it's psychologically safe, there's no blaming, but actually all leaders as you go down need to live that.
Yeah.
And actually demonstrate it. And likewise with other elements, you've got the culture of whether you work in silos or whether you come together and pair or mob. So where there's a problem or where there's a risky area, you want that encouragement from leadership and above to actually swarm together. So you might have to drop a couple of balls that are less risky or less sort of important in order to be able to come together to do this really risky, important aspect. So you do that sort of like collective problem solving sort of approach rather than people sitting and doing it for weeks and weeks on end and getting stuck on their own and being challenged because of it. And I'm going to come back to the retrospectives. Most companies have retrospectives. I can't say all because I know early in my career we didn't have retrospectives. We didn't have most ceremonies, to be honest. So retrospectives are often, like you say, a bit of a moaning sort of opportunity. But if you don't have them, then retrospectives, just having a bit of a get together as a team initially is a really good idea. So you could talk about what went well, what didn't go well. You don't have to do it in a formalized way. Just start with something. But if you do have the more formal type ones and you've got the different sort of columns that you need to be putting your post-it notes on, then not only think about sort of your problem. So I'm guilty as anything of putting most of my stickies, most of my post-it notes into that what went wrong or what could have been done better. And it used to be an in sort of joke in one of the teams I worked for many years ago, because that was literally, we were only allowed 3 post-its and all 3 of mine went into that column. And it wasn't because I didn't want to praise, because I did, and there were really good things. But if you're only given 3 stickers, I mean, what do you do? But you not only need to be putting something in there, but you also need to be putting something into the sort of the improvements area. So what actions need to be taken? And if you've got an idea, so if you've recognised this as a problem, you might want to put something in there that goes, we need to get together and talk about this in more depth, or I think this might be a solution that we could potentially trial, or whatever. So making use of those retrospectives in a more constructive way is also, I think, another cultural type shift. But they all need to be led from the top, because if you're being pushed to deliver quickly by a deadline all the time, then the first things that are going to drop are going to be anything that's sort of quality sort of related. So that's that cultural sort of guide to having retrospectives, or being able to swarm together, or being able to sort of really sort of feel safe to bring up problems, because if you do, you're going to slow things down, So it's quite a big shift, but there's lots, I think, that people could be doing, and they could certainly be getting down to the ground level and talking with them. I'm just going to add one more point to this, actually. What really
Never apologise, Philippa.
What really sort of drove me to start thinking about these things more was, back in the day, as I say, it was around the same time as the shift left came in, weirdly, but totally disconnected. The company also had this great sort of idea to get some of their chiefs and directors more involved with certain projects. And one project we had 2 chiefs that got involved with, and that is basically getting more information out of people, encouraging the trial of improvement ideas. And we had 2 chiefs within the chief's suite, the C-suite, that came and joined our team in our retrospectives. And we would not only look for what went wrong, but would also identify some improvements. And then we'd be encouraged to pick up some of those improvements, actually trial them in the next sprint, and then see if it worked. If it didn't work, it was okay. You then can move on from it. But we were really encouraged to do that. And that's something I think that's often missed when you're doing retrospectives, or you're having some sort of retrospective type conversation. You're not encouraged to trial an improvement. People go, that won't work, we can't do that, or that'll take too much time, we can't do that. Well, how's about we actually try it and see if that's true? And if that's true, we can look at why it's true and start digging into it a bit deeper. So yeah, that was a great opportunity for me, because it really sort of expanded my mindset, and my team started to get that more sort of ideas and improvements and drive that through.
Yeah, it's all about creating that opportunity for people to have a voice, and like you say, feel safe enough to be able to then go and try new things, experiment, try all this kind of stuff. And just by saying it, it's not going to happen. You've got to live and breathe it. If for anybody that's in a position of leadership, you've got to demonstrate the behaviors for people to then see that that's okay. But also, as a leader, you've got to feel comfortable to do that, because it's your leader making you feel that way. So it does, like, to your point, right? Having people from the C-suite coming into those sessions, the fact that they're sort of asking people to be open and honest and transparent and share, that's great, right? That's what you need in to encourage that type of behavior. I'm not going to lie, I've been in roles where I've had to test the water to see if blame culture really exists or not, or so you're sort of like you're almost the guinea pig in a leadership perspective to see, okay, so if I say this in this room right now with directors and C-suite members, how is this room going to react? And you're almost having to be vulnerable enough to assess that for yourself, to then be able to go, okay, it's because you can make your team feel safe and you can protect your team as much as you possibly can, but over time that really grinds you down if you're not getting the same sort of support and encouragement and psychological safety, and you're not feeling that, right? So so I've often, on a few occasions I've tested that water to go, where does this really lie? If I drop this in here into this conversation, I am not going to say what the results were, by the way, because it might give some stuff away. But yeah, it's sometimes in a senior leadership position, you need to put yourself in a vulnerable place to understand that more, sort of from an organizational perspective, to then allow that to flow into your teams and and enable your teams to feel the same way. But it's hard. Culture is hard, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, and the final one, we've already been touching on it around leadership. I mean, I think from my perspective, everything flows through leading by example. Everything flows through, enabling your teams to be successful, giving them the visibility of, all the things that we've been talking about. So that's how I'm reading into that. But from your perspective, Philippa, in your model, what does leadership and decisions mean to you?
You see, decisions is an interesting topic in itself. I think everything that we do really should be, I'm going to use the word, feeding back into what we're the rest of the system, basically, so that the right decisions could be made to do next. And whether that's what's going on in production, feeding back into products so that they can make the right decisions, or whether it's the smaller loops, it's still there. But I think to come back to sort of what I was talking about earlier, which was leadership often make the decisions as to what we're going to be measured against and what priorities we need to put on the work that's coming through. That's not always. I know I've worked in companies where the deadlines and the prioritization has come from sales rather than leadership, but I guess in some ways that's because the senior leadership have allowed that to happen. But it's really vital that we get the right metrics going on, and we're being measured by the right things. Otherwise, there's a lot of encouragement to look to basically do things in a poor way. I'm just trying to think of a much better way of putting this. So if we think about metrics, and you've got your lagging metrics, so the aim of the game is to have a number of lines of code that you write. So a developer's being measured against that. And that will then determine probably something else, maybe promotion or how good they're deemed to be or whatever. If you've got that, or if you've got something like the number of bugs that testers are finding, the more bugs you find, the better you are as a tester, and so on and so forth, then you're actually driving the wrong behaviours. And you're actually driving people to write lots of code where something could be written much simpler in a much more readable and easy flow type way. And if you're writing too much code, potentially it's the testability of it becomes really awkward as well. So how can you be baking in all this quality with those things? And then somebody comes along in 6 months' time and has to actually refactor what you've done. Wow, good luck to them. And likewise with the testers, I used to love finding bugs. That used to be my absolute dream. It's and I mean it still is, don't get me wrong. But the last thing I would want to be doing now is finding bugs when it gets to me later on. I want to help people to prevent them. So if I'm being scored against the number of bugs that I find, if I'm doing in a testing type role, and I'm just going to sit there and basically look for every single little bug I could possibly come up with, whether people agree that it's actually appropriate or not. So it really is important that the leadership are setting us the right metrics. And with that, it's like, how quickly is your cycle time? How good can you recover from any issues that are found? And so on and so forth. There's so many different metrics that your DORA metrics basically is where I was going down with that sort of list. And so many beyond. What is the feedback you're getting in your customer sort of surveys that you're doing, and so many other things that you can bring in to make sure that you are building in the right types of metrics along the way. And that's what I would say on the leadership front is a real core key thing, as well as them sort of helping to bring the culture down the different layers that are needed.
Yeah, it is so important, and I've experienced it, both the good and the bad of those sort of metrics, and whether they're KPIs that teams are having to hit. I mean, I've been in teams where you got shout out at the town hall if the amount of velocity points you achieved this sprint or last sprint.
Yeah.
And I mean, how easy are velocity points to gain, right? It's
absolutely.
Like, we did 150 velocity points. Amazing. Yeah, we only did 2 tickets. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
But I would say there's another side to the whole sort of story point side of things, because with story points, you want to get through. I mean, even if you've got them across, 30 different tickets, you're aiming to deliver things at speed. You're trying to get through things as quickly as you can, rather than really thinking about the sort of in-depth stuff. So, if you're being called out for the number of story points that you're achieving within a sprint, it's like, whoa, okay. But, that doesn't tell us anything.
No, it doesn't. And I think, it is really important that what teams are being measured on, you have to bring quality into that, and you have to be very clear on what quality means within your organization and for your teams, and then how you want to go about measuring that. Now, that can be led by your head of quality or whoever that is, but ultimately the business more collectively need to decide on that, right? Because it isn't just number of defects and this and that. It's so again, sort of coming together as a leadership team to say, right, okay, so how are we going to measure this, and how are we measuring our team's levels of success, and then move forward from there and allow them to drive their behaviors in a positive way. If you want your teams to collaborate, there's no point in giving them individual goals. Right? Because they're going to go away and do their own thing and make sure they're hitting their markers and such like. But if one of your key values as a business is collaboration, guess what? You've just killed that value there and then, right? So, I'm not going to keep coming back to the bonus-driven development, but I will keep coming back to it until somebody bloody does something about it, because it's a horrible thing.
Absolutely. And it's too right, isn't it?
It is.
Where's that soapbox?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, oh no, I'm already sat on it. I'm on it. What you can't see the soapbox that I'm sitting on right now,
I
Philippa.
thought you were.
It's what makes me a little bit taller on camera.
I was going to say, I thought you were looking tall today.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely. Philippa, I mean, we've been talking for well over an hour, and this has been brilliant. And stepping through your thinking and your sort of, the involvement of your mindset and stuff like that has been great. I'm keen though, just to sort of bring it all together. We talked about a lot, and we can't just snap our fingers and for this to happen overnight, right? And some people that are listening to this will be in teams. There'll be quality engineers in teams, and some people will be in leadership roles. But I'm just wondering, just to kind of pull it all together, if there's sort of three things, let's say three things that you could recommend to people to get started on this journey, what would they be? They could be the same three things that you focused on to start with. I don't know, but what would they be? Put you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. What three things? I think first and foremost, one of the important things to do, and it's an easy phrase to say, but harder to really understand, and that is to let go of the myth that is quality equals testing. I know we've seen it many a time in many a presentation. You always get this sort of quality does not equal testing, but what does that really mean? And that's a harder one to sort of like delve into. But I think that's something as individuals we need to make sure that we are definitely not allowing testing to prove whether something is quality or not. And that's probably a really good starting point. So quality, you need to be baking it in at the beginning, and you need to start thinking about how you can do that, what that looks like for your organisation, and what once you've identified what quality even means, because there's so many quality attributes out there, and it will differ from context to context. So you can obviously, one of the things you can do if it's just testing equals quality, you can hire a load more testers. But that's not actually going to get you there. So if you actually come back to this quality as a system, think about it as a holistic whole thing, and be looking at what you can do within your role, which isn't everything, because leaders can do so much more than I would encourage somebody who's maybe a junior or a mid within their teams. But you need to be looking at that system being sort of evolved. And I would start with psychological safety for that. So if leaders can make it psychologically safe for any member of their team to talk, to speak up, you get people who are quiet in meetings, you get people who are more vocal. So let's try and work with those that are quieter and find out why, find out a little bit more, and encourage them to be able to speak up a little bit more, either in a group setting or in a one-to-one setting, if it needs to start there. And if you can get that culture really evolving where people are talking more about things, then I think that would be a really good step towards moving things towards this quality as a system, or systemic quality, a type approach. So I think my final thing that I'm going to put in there is going to be around just a reminder, really, that just because teams or team members communicate a lot via Slack, verbally, whatever method, doesn't mean that they're automatically collaborating. So work out what collaboration looks like for you within your team and within your department, as well as how people are then going to communicate amongst themselves. So what collaboration isn't for me, it's having a ticket that's got all the requirements in it, the developer doing their bit for that requirement, and then the ticket being passed over the fence or on to the next person, and then the tester then doing all of the stuff that they read from that ticket. That's not collaboration for me, even though you've got that collaboration that happened at the beginning when you were all deciding what was going to be written in the ticket. And it's also not communication, because quite often the tickets are just moved into the next column, and that communicates nothing other than one person's finished and the other person needs to start. So yeah, getting collaboration and communication right and clear within your team and across the rest of the business is absolutely key. So my three are: testing definitely does not equal quality, and quality doesn't equal testing. Psychological safety is paramount, and collaboration and communication aren't as simple as just saying that you do it.
Love that.
There you go.
Absolutely love that, Philippa. And I've absolutely loved having you on and having this conversation. If people want to connect with you, LinkedIn, is that the best place to connect with you?
Yeah,
I'm going to get
LinkedIn.
loads of fans after this.
LinkedIn, absolutely, yeah. But also on the Ministry of Testing, if you're on there and you've got a subscription, obviously,
Yeah.
I'm just going to plug the fact that obviously people have profiles on there now, so you can definitely follow me on there.
Indeed.
And they're my two main sort of social media platforms. But you can also feel free to ping me a private message if you want to have a chat, because I'm all for having sort of mentor type chats or just conversations like this, really, and learning from other people as well as hopefully helping others to learn. So I love growing. I love learning. It's important for all of us.
100%. And I'm sure a lot of people have learned a lot from the show today. So thank you again, Philippa, so much for joining. I really do appreciate it. Well, that's it for another episode of Quality Talks podcast. I hope you've taken some great learnings away, and those 3 key points that Philippa talked about there are a good way to get started. So if you've enjoyed this episode, obviously like it for me, share it. And if you aren't already subscribed, click that little subscribe button. You know you want to. But more importantly, join us on another episode of Quality Talks podcast next time. Take care for now.